Thanks very much. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Appreciate it. That might be my first and last standing ovation ever right there. Thank you. I appreciate that. So today we're going to talk about what we've all noticed over the past several years is that somehow folks seem so distracted these days, right? You sit with your friends for a meal, and somehow everyone all over the table, everyone's checking their devices. Or you sit down to do a big project at work, and you say, you're definitely gonna do that thing you've been procrastinating, and somehow you find yourself checking email, Slack channels, Facebook, Google, whatever, for the next 30, 45 minutes. What's going on? Why are we so distracted these days? And is it really the technology that's doing it to us? Or is it the feedback that's doing it? Or is there something deeper going on? So one of the reasons that we are so hooked to our technology is that this technology is designed to be engaging. A few years ago, I wrote this book, Hooked. In fact, one of the first conferences I spoke about this book was at this very first CMX Summit. And since that time, this book has been used by thousands of companies not to build nefarious time wasters, right? I didn't write this book for Facebook and Google and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack. They already know these techniques. The gaming companies have known them for years. I wrote this book for you. I wrote this book for people who are trying to build communities, build products and services that depend upon people coming back to use the product. And so the book has been used to help people form healthy habits around saving money, exercising more, education habits. All of these things have been done using the central model in the book. And if you want to see the talk about the book, you can go to the video from the CMX Summit from 5 years ago. But I want to talk about the dark side a little bit. I want to talk about what is the cost of having so many tools out there, so many products and services that are designed to be so engaging. You know, a few years ago, shortly after I wrote this book, I had this very wonderful afternoon with my daughter, and we had this book of activities that daddies and daughters could play together, right? That was designed to bring daddies and daughters closer together. And I remember one of the questions in this activity book was to ask each other this question. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I wish I could tell you what my daughter said, but I can't. Because in that moment, I was distracted. I was looking at my phone and doing something that I don't even remember because something had distracted me on my device. And my daughter got the message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And she left the room, she walked out, and the next thing I knew, she was gone. She went to go play with something else. You know, one time I actually told this story to a friend of mine, and so he asked his daughter what superpower she would want. And she told him that she would want the superpower of being able to talk to animals. And he said, talk to animals, that's interesting. Why would you want to talk to animals? And she said, so that when mommy and daddy are on their computers, I'll have someone to talk to. So mean, right, exactly. That hurts. So what is it about these technologies and what can we do about them? So over the past few years, I've been studying this very question. And if you ask me what superpower I would want, I would tell you that I would want the power to become indistractable. I think this will be the skill of the century. The power to do whatever it is that you say you want to do with your time and attention will be the critical power of the next 100 years. So how do we do this? How do we get control over our attention and control our lives? Well, we should start by realizing that this is not a new problem. That in fact, 2,500 years ago, Socrates and Plato talked about the nature of akrasia, this tendency that we all have to do things against our better judgment. This is not a new problem. And let's be honest, if Mark Zuckerberg said, you know what, I've had enough of this stuff, I'm shutting down Facebook, do you really think people will no longer become distracted? No, of course not. They'll go back to doing all the things that humans do to distract themselves, gossip and the news and whatever, to provide for distraction. So that is nothing new. So how do we start to gain control of our attention in our lives? How can we start thinking about distraction to put it in its place and do the things that we want to do with our time in our lives? Well, we can think about it in this way, that we can think to ourselves, the best way to understand distraction is to understand the opposite of distraction. And many people think if you ask them, what's the opposite of distraction? They'll tell you it's focus, but it's not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. you'll notice that both words end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. And both words, traction and distraction, come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do in your life, what you want to do with intent. The opposite of traction is distraction, any action that you take that pulls you away from what you want to do with your time, things that you are not doing with intent. Now, many people, when they think about distraction, they'll say something like, oh, I wanted to do this project. I had this thing that I've been procrastinating, and then I was gonna do it, but then I got distracted. My phone started ringing. And they confuse what's called an external trigger with the action that then they got distracted doing. So that ping, ding, and ring, anything in our environment that prompts us to either traction or distraction is called an external trigger. And this is kind of the usual suspects. This is the stuff that people blame for their distractions, but it turns out there's a much more pernicious source of distraction. And this has to do with our internal triggers. Internal triggers are these uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape from. If we're gonna answer this question of why do we do things against our better interest? Why do we have this tendency towards akrasia, towards distraction? We have to go a level deeper to ask ourselves, why do we do anything? And if you ask most people the nature of motivation, they'll give you some version of carrots and sticks, right? This is called Freud's pleasure principle, that everything we do is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, right? Wrong. Turns out that is not true, that we are not motivated by the desire to pursue pleasure and avoid pain, but in fact, what drives human motivation is just pain, all the way down. In fact, even the pursuit of a pleasurable sensation, wanting to feel good, craving, desire, there's a reason we say love hurts. Because what drives us to action, it's called the homeostatic response, is discomfort. So what this means is if that we are going to manage distraction, we have to start by understanding these internal triggers. Because the icky, sticky truth that many of us don't want to admit is that we use these devices, or any other distraction for that matter, not just our technologies, all sorts of distractions, for psychological relief, to escape something that we don't want to feel. And if we don't address that problem first, we will always be distracted by something. So what do we do with this recognition? Well, we only have 2 choices. A, we can change the source of the discomfort. When I had that afternoon with my daughter, I have to admit to you that I could only take so many hours of toddler time. I needed a break. I see some nodding heads from parents, right? You know that sensation of, okay, I just need to do something adult for a little bit. But I could have handled it in a healthier manner. So you can either fix the source of the problem or learn techniques to cope with that discomfort. Part of the normal human condition is dissatisfaction. One of my big gripes with the self-help and personal development industry is that we're constantly told if we're not happy, if we're not satisfied all the time, something's wrong with us. And nothing could be further from the truth. We are designed with these cognitive quirks, rumination, boredom, hedonic adaptation, all of these cognitive quirks that behavioral psychologists tell us keeps us in a perpetual state of disquietude. And so we have to learn tactics to cope with that discomfort. And it starts by understanding this fundamental truth that if all behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort, that means, folks, that time management is pain management. That all the life hacks, all the gurus, all the books will not help you if fundamentally we don't understand this fact and deal with it. Time management is pain management. So here's some quick hits. So my book, Indistractable, comes out in 5 days. You're getting the sneak preview here. There's a lot in there, but I want to give you just a few things that you can walk away with today to help you start managing these internal triggers. The first step is to note the sensation. Psychologists tell us by simply understanding and becoming aware of that feeling, that's the first step. And then what we want to do is to get curious about that sensation. Now, don't do what I used to do. I didn't used to get curious. I would get contemptuous. And so many of us do this. We bully ourselves. We say, oh, you see, I'm lazy. I must have a disorder. I have a poor work ethic, right? I'm a very distractible person. And we beat ourselves up as opposed to just saying, okay, I'm feeling a little bit of boredom right now, anxiety, tension, whatever it might be, And that's a natural part of doing a difficult task. That part of growth, part of getting better at something is a little bit of discomfort, and it's totally natural. So we want to get curious about that sensation. Then what we want to do is to do what's called surfing the urge. This comes out of acceptance and commitment therapy. And surfing the urge is this idea that these negative emotions don't last very long. They crest and then subside. But in the moment, it feels like it's going to last forever. When you have that urge for that piece of chocolate cake you know you shouldn't eat, or that checking email when you know you should be working on that big project, what you want to do for yourself is to tell yourself, I am just going to surf this urge for 10 minutes. This is called the 10-minute rule. And sometimes I'll take out my phone and say, okay, set a timer for 10 minutes. And my job is to either surf that urge and just feel that sensation and become curious about it, or get back to the task at hand. And what you will find is 90% of the time, you'll get back to that task at hand. And if you still want to do that thing, that temptation, you can give into it in just 10 minutes. So that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do to start mastering these internal triggers. I want to move on to the next step that we can take to master distraction, is to make time for traction. Remember we talked, traction is about things that pull you towards what you want to do, the opposite of distraction. So how do we make more time for traction in our day? Well, the first step is to realize that the difference between traction and distraction is one word. And that word is intent. Anything it is that you plan to do with your time that's consistent with your values, do it. You want to be on social media? Great. You want to watch YouTube videos? Do it. But do it on your schedule, not on someone else's. And so this means that we can't call something a distraction unless we know what it distracted us from. You know, when I was writing my book, I talked to many people that I interviewed in the course of the past 5 years writing this book. And I had one friend who told me, you know, everything's so distracting these days. My boss is pinging me on Slack, and my kids are calling me, and do you see what happened in the news today? And do you see what's going on Twitter? I'm so distracted, I can't get anything done. And then I said, wow, that's really tough. Can I see what it was you planned to do today? What's on your calendar that you got distracted from? And she took out her phone, and she opened her calendar app, and she showed it to me, and it was blank. Turns out 2/3 of Americans don't keep a calendar. And so in this day and age, the price of progress, the price of having endless potential distractions is that we got to start doing this, folks. And I know for some of you think, oh, that's too extreme. I can never do this. This has been shown to be one of the most well-studied techniques for increasing your personal productivity and increasing your sense of well-being. This is called making an implementation intention. Just a fancy way of saying planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. It takes about 15 minutes a week, and what we're doing is adjusting our calendar for the week ahead, okay? The reason you're doing this is not to say militantly, oh, I have to do everything that's on my schedule. No. The idea here is to have something to refer to so you know the difference between traction and distraction. Because distraction tricks us. Let me ask you if this has ever happened to you. You sit down at your desk and you say, okay, now I'm gonna do that thing that I've been procrastinating on. Now I'm gonna do the thing I don't wanna do right after I check email, right? That's called pseudo work. It's something that feels worky, it feels like it's productive, but if it's not what you plan to do with intent, then it is just as much of a distraction as playing a video game or watching YouTube videos. So the only way to know the difference between traction and distraction is to use one of these time box calendars so that you can take a look at the calendar and say, anything that I plan to do is traction, anything that I didn't plan to do is distraction. So what we want to do here is to make time for traction by planning the input, not the output. So many of us buy into this myth of the to-do list. That all we have to do is put stuff on a to-do list, right? This is how you're supposed to get things done. You just put stuff on a to-do list, and poof, it gets done somehow. I call bullshit. Because if you're anything like I was, I would move half of my to-do list from one day to the next, to the next, to the next, and never get those things done. Why? Because they didn't have a place on your calendar. The to-do list is the output. Your input is your time. Then what we want to do is to get rid of low-value work. Harvard Business Review found that 1 day out of every 5-day work week for the average knowledge worker is spent doing low-value tasks, tasks that people didn't need to do or could have given off for someone else to do. So what we want to do is to use these amazing technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We can use these tools to travel plan, to make meeting appointments. We don't have to do all that time-wasting work. And then finally, what we want to do is to spend less time communicating and more time concentrating. The average knowledge worker gets 100 emails a day and has 2 meetings every day. That leaves an hour and a half for everything else. And so if you carve out the time to just think, just have time to strategize about how you can improve at your job, in your life, or take care of yourself in a better way, you will have a huge competitive advantage over your colleagues. Now, part of the reason that all of this communicating is so pernicious, all the pings, dings, and rings are so pernicious, is because they lead to so much distraction. And there's one profession where distraction is literally a matter of life and death. If I were to ask you, what is the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States? 3rd leading cause of death. I'll give you the first 2. Number 1 is heart disease. Number 2 is cancer. What's the 3rd leading cause of death? What would you guess? Depression, suicide, Alzheimer's, accidents, not even close. If it was a disease, the 3rd leading cause of death would be medical errors. Prescription mistakes, people getting the wrong medication from healthcare practitioners inside the hospital. Why does this happen? It turns out that this problem is a 100% preventable human error. That is until a brave group of nurses right here at UCSF did a study to figure out why this was happening. And they figured out that the cause was distraction, that when nurses were dosing out medication, they were constantly interrupted by their colleagues, doctors, patients were interrupting them, and they were making mistakes. And of course, the lesson here should be very, very clear, that the nurses didn't realize they were making these mistakes until it was too late. And this happens to us every day. We think we're doing a good job, I'm doing fine, my work output's great, but we don't realize how much better we could be at our job if we didn't get distracted. We don't realize the mistakes we're making, just like those nurses didn't either. So these nurses came up with a brilliant solution that reduced prescription mistakes by 88%. 88% reduction in these prescription mistakes. And the solution was not some multi-million-dollar program. It wasn't some fancy new technology. It was plastic vests. Plastic vests that these nurses wore that told their colleagues that there's a drug round in progress, please do not disturb me. And this simple tactic almost eliminated this problem of prescription mistakes. So what can we learn from this? How can we learn from this lesson and kind of apply it into our own lives? Well, how many of you work in open floor plan offices? Anybody here? Most of you, okay? Open floor plan offices. They have some benefits. They save companies a ton of money because they don't have to give you all your own office. But there's a big problem. It's a huge source of distraction, right? I see a lot of nodding heads. Well, why does that happen? Because your colleague comes by and says, hey, did you hear the latest gossip? You want to talk about this? What's going on? Let's get some coffee, which is great on your schedule, but not when you're trying to do focused work. So what's the solution? How can we learn from these nurses? How about this? What if we started using this simple piece of paper? It's a piece of cardstock that comes inside every copy of my book, or you can print it out for yourself. I'll give you this link to print it out for yourself for free. And we started using these screen signs on our monitors to tell our colleagues, hey, for right now, for this 45 minutes or for an hour, I can't be disturbed. I'm doing focused work. And I know some of you are thinking, well, that's why I put on my headphones, right? Let me tell you something. When you put on headphones, everybody thinks you're watching YouTube videos, okay? So what you want to do is to make it really explicit that I'm doing my focused work right now. Please come back a little later. We can use our technology to block out, to hack back these external triggers. Do not disturb while driving is one of the most underused features of every iPhone. When you use do not disturb while driving, if someone texts you or calls you when you have this feature on, they'll get a message that says, I'm busy right now, but if you text me the word urgent, then the message will come through, okay? We can also clean up all of these external triggers on our desktops. How many of you have a desktop that looks like this, okay? We don't have to live like this. We can take all of these external triggers, we put them in one folder, we call that folder everything, and then we can search for whatever we want later on, because all of these external triggers, studies have found, degrade our performance, and we don't even know it's happening. Same thing with our phones. All of these notifications, these pings, these dings, these rings, we can change these settings. We can create an indistractable phone, and it takes you less than 45 minutes to do so. So what we want to do is to hack back these external triggers. And the first step is to ask ourselves, is this trigger serving me, or am I serving it? If one of these notifications is prompting you towards traction, right? You get a notification on your phone that says, hey, it's time to work out, it's time for that meeting, it's time to do the thing you plan to do according to your time box schedule, wonderful. But if it's prompting you towards distraction, well, then it's not serving you. You are serving it. Then we can just adjust these notification settings. The stats tell us that 2/3 of people who own a smartphone never change their notification settings. Can we honestly say that technology is addictive and is hijacking our brains when we haven't taken 10 minutes to change our notification settings? Kind of hard case to make. Well, the last thing we need to do, I believe, is to leave these distracting devices outside of meetings, whether it's in a personal setting with our friends or in an office context, one laptop per meeting, okay? One laptop that projects onto the screen what we're talking about so we can record notes, and we need to leave those devices outside. Why? Because if we are going to meet in the real world, we have to be present both in body and mind. And finally, the last step to becoming indistractable is to prevent distractions with pacts. Now, the first recorded case of someone using one of these pacts comes to us from a story that is 2,500 years old, the story of Ulysses in the Odyssey. In this story, Ulysses is this hero who has to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens. Now, the Sirens are these mythical creatures that sing this magical song, and any sailor who hears this song crashes his ship onto the shore of the Sirens' island and dies. Now, Ulysses, the hero, knows this is going to happen, and he takes steps to prevent doing something he doesn't want to do. He prevents distraction with a pre-commitment. He tells his crew to put wax in their ears, and he tells them to bind him to the mast of the ship, and he says, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, don't let me go. And it works. He sails right past the island of the Sirens and safely brings his crew home because he made a pact. He took a pre-commitment. We can use the same exact lesson in our professional lives. So every morning when I sit down to write, writing is hard work. It's something that I constantly feel like I want to get distracted while I'm doing. I can use an app called Self-Control, totally free, on my desktop that blocks out the apps that I know are tempting. No Gmail, no Wikipedia, no Google, nothing. When I'm doing my writing time, I don't want access to those things. There's this other app called Forest, also free, that every time I do focused work, I open up this app called Forest, and as soon as I click go, a little virtual tree is planted. Now, if I pick up the phone and do anything with it, the little virtual tree dies, right? So I don't want to be a virtual tree murderer, and it's enough of a pact, enough of a contract that I've made with myself to stay on track. Another thing you can do is to get a focus buddy, right? Someone in your office that you work with, that you say you keep each other accountable. And if you say, oh, I work from home, or I don't have someone at work I can work with, you can go online to focusmate.com and find your own focus mate. Now, this is a company that I like so much, I actually invested in this company. This works, remember what chat roulette used to be like? Okay, but imagine chat roulette without all the nasty stuff. Okay, that's kind of like what focus mate is like. You sign up for a time. This is particularly good if you have trouble getting started in the morning. So you can book a time for yourself and say, okay, at this time, I'm gonna start working. You're matched with another person who's also doing focused work. And for that time, you can see each other on the little video screen, and that has an amazing impact on your ability to stay focused on what you're doing. So the idea here is to reduce distractions with pacts. Again, there's a lot of other techniques that I describe in the book, but I just wanted to give you a few quick hits. The idea here is to block distraction that comes from tech with tech. But I have to give you one word of warning, that this technique can backfire. That this is what we do last. Many people like to jump to this solution because it's the easiest to remember, but I'm telling you, if you do it first, you will fail. You have to first master the internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back the external triggers before you try this technique. Another reason why people fail when they use these pacts is some people, when they fail, as we all invariably will on the path to becoming indistractable, some people can't get back on the horse. They find it very difficult to get back on track. And what's the solution to that? The solution to that is self-compassion. Studies have found that people who are more self-compassionate are much more likely to achieve their long-term goals. So how do we become more self-compassionate? Easy. We talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a friend. So many of us beat ourselves up in our internal dialogue, and it's not helping. And you know what else isn't helping? This idea that technology is somehow hijacking our brains, that it's taking over, that it's addicting everyone, that's also not scientifically correct, and it's also not helpful, because we are not helpless. There are so many things that we can do to put distraction in its place by mastering these internal triggers, by making time for traction, by hacking back the external triggers, and finally by reducing distraction with these pacts. And the message I want to leave with you today is that we can do this. You know, when I was finishing up my book, I sat down with my daughter and I asked her, I said, look, honey, I'm really sorry. When I first asked you this question, I got distracted and I wasn't paying attention and I don't remember what you said to me. Can you tell me now, what is the superpower that you would most want if you could have any superpower? And here's what she said, honest to goodness, this is what she told me. She said that if she could have any superpower, she would want the power to always be kind. That's what she said, swear to God. So I wiped off my tear. I was very proud that day. And then I thought about it a little bit more and I realized, wait a minute, all of us can be kind, can't we? Right? That's not really a superpower. We have that ability within us. Just as we all have the ability to put distraction in its place, to get the best out of these tools without letting them get the best of us. We all have the power to become indistractable. Thank you very much. Quick thing, thank you so much, I appreciate the love. One quick thing, can I ask you for a quick favor? Can everyone lift up their phones for a quick second? Yeah, so I want to take a picture of you guys for my Instagram account because you're a beautiful crowd. Yeah, you look great. Thank you. And the reason I had you lift your phones as well is because I'd really love to hear from you. If you can take this quick survey for me. As I mentioned, the book doesn't come out for another 5 days. This is brand new. I would love to hear what you thought of the presentation. Just 5 questions. Let me know what you thought. I read every single response. And this woman here is doing a survey, so she gets, as a gift here, a galley copy of the book. It's not even available in stores yet. And I look forward to hearing from you. Yes, congratulations. I hope you enjoy it. If I didn't, we don't have time for Q&A today, but if you have any questions for me, unfortunately, I can't take them right now because we're out of time. But if you go to nearandfar.com, there's a form there you can fill out. Happy to answer all your questions later on. And with that, thank you so much.